Hey everybody, it's Swank Ivy, and today I'm back with another Letters to an Asexual. Can you believe this is number 30? Today I'm going to read you a couple of excerpts from a podcast that one of my fellow ace activists was recently involved with, and the host of the podcast said some rather ignorant things about demisexuality. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about what the person said outside of these quotes, but I am going to read you just a couple of them that the person who was hosting the podcast said about demisexuality, and then I'm going to read you some responses that I've had to comments like his and comments that other people have made ever since demisexuality started being a label people started using. So, my response that I'm going to read you is not a direct response to this person, but it is my general response to people who say these kinds of things about demisexuality and also asexuality and any label anybody wants to use regarding their sexuality. So first I'm going to start with the quotes. There are two of them. The first one goes like this. Demisexual is one of those faux labels that just aren't necessary, and we talk about it a lot today. It's totally a real thing that people feel, but it's also a preference, just as sapiosexual is a preference, not a sexual orientation. Because there's no blonde sexual, there's no big-titted sexual. You can decide to call yourself that, but it's still just a preference of who you like to bang or not bang. And the second quote goes like this. Preferences. You can have your labels, but don't talk to me like you're oppressed and painfully discriminated against for not being sexually promiscuous. No one ever got denied a job or housing because they were demisexual. Settle down! So as you can see, this person has a pretty low opinion of demisexuality, but it seems to be based on a misunderstanding of what it is. And based on some other things this person said, this ignorance about demisexuality extends to asexuality and some other related labels. So it really seems that the person is not only defining demisexuality incorrectly, but making a bunch of assumptions about demisexuality based on those misconceptions, and going on to talk about how we can't claim oppression or discrimination based on whether we're promiscuous. So I'm going to read you now an essay that I've altered slightly for purposes of this video that is kind of my general response to people who say things like this about labels they don't understand. Beginning now. What I hear when people talk like this is that they want to limit other people's ability to communicate. Plain and simple. No matter how little it has anything to do with them, certain types of people see or hear a word they don't understand, like demisexual, immediately squawk about its uselessness and somehow spin over to screaming you're not oppressed and you think you're a special snowflake. When you say demisexual people don't need a word because they're not oppressed, you're suggesting that the only reason to name an experience is to claim special rights or fight terrible oppression. It's really not that difficult to understand why someone whose sexual attraction experiences don't match the experiences we're led to believe are normal might want to talk about it with others who have the same experiences. When you say demisexual people are using a label because they want to seem special, you're suggesting that their orientation is about you and about getting attention from you, not about them. By accusing them of acting out with attention-getting behavior, you're saying speaking about their lives is all about having your eyes on them, which, in case you haven't noticed as you dish it out, seems to result in mocking and harassment, so why would anyone want that? Very self-centered of you, isn't it? Just like marriage equality isn't about wrecking anyone else's marriage, discussing one's experience isn't commentary on someone else's. Occam's razor suggests people talk about their experiences because connecting with others who understand is comforting. So why would you invent a muddy motive to take legitimacy away from their desire to connect? And if it so eats at your guts that they might get attention for it, why don't you stop giving it to them? When you say demisexual people don't need a word because that's just how people normally are, okay, well, the asexual community disagrees since, in our experience, sexual attraction to strangers is expected, is common, and is normalized, but if you really think it's normal to be sexually attracted to someone only after months or years of developing other positive feelings toward them, and even then only once in a while, I'm not going to argue with you. I am going to say, so what? If it's normal, it can still have a name to describe that specific experience. Calling oneself demisexual is in no way an attempt to divorce oneself completely from normality in pursuit of specialness, of course. When you say demisexuality is ridiculous because we don't need a word for having sex only when we're in love, or it's ridiculous because we're trying to make an orientation out of not being a slut, you're not even listening to the people who used the word to try to communicate with you, because you're defining it wrong. You're making assumptions and you're mocking a claim that the people who are using the word aren't even making. In the case of demisexuality, they're saying they don't feel sexual attraction outside the described circumstances. They're not saying they won't sleep with someone if these terms aren't met, nor are they describing any system of ethics or morals, nor are they shaming people who do not experience attraction the way they do. If you are re-describing their orientation in ways that make it easier for you to mock them and call them slut-shamers or what have you, look at what you're doing. If you have to change what they're saying to make it ridiculous, who's really in the wrong here? When you say demisexuality is silly because it's a made-up word, what the hell is your point? Every word was invented at some point to describe something someone needed to say. And when you start hearing it more, that kind of suggests that lots of people wanted a word for this experience. Who are you to laugh and say they should stop because that word isn't in a dictionary or isn't widespread yet? Really? You're going to tell someone the fact that they had to make up a word for their experience has anything to do with whether they should be talking about it? Please stop mocking other people's conversations about themselves. Please stop rewriting what they're saying so you can slam them for their claiming oppression, specialness, or moral positions they are not claiming. Please stop using the fact that you don't relate to or understand someone else's orientation as an excuse for making an active attempt to limit their conversations. And please stop acting like you're the arbiter for what experiences are serious, real, oppressive, or common enough to warrant terminology. Author's note, I am not demisexual. I have no horse in this race. I just have no problem listening to what demisexual people have said about themselves and understanding and agreeing that they are experiencing something that sounds distinct enough from how most people experience it that having a word makes sense. And I'll just add to this that demisexual, as well as demi-romantic, as well as gray sexual, as well as gray romantic, as well as any of the additional terms that people have used to describe orientations and experiences that are under the asexual and possibly aromantic umbrellas, they have a place in our community. They have a lot in common with less complicated asexual orientations. I mean, as an asexual, aromantic woman, I've always had a really easy time kind of describing my experience with those words, but sometimes it can get a little bit more nuanced, a little more difficult to describe, and a little bit more in gray areas that, we need to have a place where we can talk about these things. And the asexual community inherently has so much in common with people who are in these gray areas. So when demisexual people are talking about it in the context of asexuality, in the asexual community, we need to make sure that we are welcoming for those discussions and that we don't try to silence them in our community. And then people who are outside of the asexual community who want to be allies or at least want to provide a platform for us to be talking about our experiences need to include those orientations too and listen to what they're saying about themselves. Because if your first inclination in hearing what they're saying is to redefine what they're saying and then say why it doesn't make sense to you or why it doesn't make sense to call that anything under the asexual spectrum, there's not really a whole lot of listening going on. And why would you invite someone to talk about their experiences on, say, a podcast or in an article if you're basically just going to turn around and tell them why you don't think this discussion needs to happen at all or needs to happen in these spaces? So, again, I've made this statement elsewhere. I am on board with asexual community, including umbrella understandings of an asexual spectrum that is not cut and dried. And I welcome and will listen to discussions that involve demisexual and gray sexual, demi-romantic and gray romantic people, and anyone in between. So that concludes this letter to an asexual. I have 30 under my belt now, And I will see you guys for number 31, because I am not running out of material anytime soon, I can tell you that.